Boy, do we have a big update in a case involving a Georgia 9th grade teacher accused of sexually abusing one of her own students.
Why do men have to be so creepy sometimes?
This teacher's name is Danielle Weaver, and she was pretty outspoken on TikTok. She showed a lot of personality on social media. She seemed to be that fun teacher who students could look up to, that teacher who perhaps they could relate to. But now she is facing decades in prison for what she allegedly did. And we just got our hands on the grand jury indictment and frankly, the details of what Weaver allegedly did to one of her own students.
The official statement from the Lee County School System, dated February 2026, the safety and well-being of our students remains our highest priority. That sentence was emailed to parents 4 days after the Bureau of Investigation arrested a 9th grade teacher. Now, read it again. The safety and well-being of our students remains our highest priority. Hold that phrase in your mind, because we are about to walk through 47-page indictment that reads like a security incident report from a facility that had no security at all. It's like a fire department issuing a press release about the importance of fire safety while the charred remains of a house are still smoldering behind the podium.
The parents obtained by WALB, the Lee County School System said this, quote, reports and rumors are circulating concerning alleged inappropriate contact between a teacher and student in a Lee County school system. We at the 9th grade campus can confirm that there is an ongoing legal investigation involving law enforcement concerning the alleged conduct of a former staff member who is no longer working for the district. Upon discovering the allegations, school and district leadership acted immediately to ensure the safety and well-being of students, as well as to conduct a thorough investigation. The individuals who have been directly affected have been contacted. The district will continue to cooperate with law enforcement as well as with those affected to ensure that no obstacles to resolving the investigation exist. The safety and well-being of our students remains our highest priority. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So that is from the school system back in February, around the time that Weaver was.
Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to EvidenceAxis, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. The teacher is Danielle Weaver.
The last time we talked about the teacher we're talking about today, Danielle Weaver, we knew that she was in big trouble for what she allegedly did. It was back in February, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had been called in to investigate her and investigate whether she had molested one of her own students. But at that point, the details surrounding what she allegedly did, that hadn't been released. We just knew that she was going to be facing charges potentially, but all of that now has changed in the wake of the documentation that we just got our hands on in just the last day or so. And Weaver is now facing 8 charges, including multiple counts of child molestation. Police are alleging she sexually abused a student multiple times. That not only includes multiple times allegedly on school property, but even in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. Now, before we dive into the new details we have on this case, let's go back a little bit.
30 years old, a wife, a mother, a self-proclaimed fun personality on TikTok who posted videos of her fruit roll-ups in her shopping.
Very quickly show you what allegedly led up to all of this.
A blue raspberry fruit roll-up, and I put strawberry ice cream in it. It's really good. Listen. And it's crunchy. Got my sweet pregnancy fix on tonight.
On social media, she was the relatable educator, the one who complained about creepy men at Burlington Coat Factory. But the grand jury indictment out of Lee County Superior Court tells a parallel story that doesn't sync with the social media feed. It lays out a timeline of systematic boundary destruction that jumps off the page with the cold precision of a GPS tracker.
The investigation against Danielle Weaver started in February. That's when law enforcement was brought in. But now we are learning about her alleged crimes, and they appear to have happened, and again, all of this is alleged, weeks before that. So let's lay out this new information we have from the grand jury indictment out of Lee County Superior Court in Georgia. So this indictment lays out what Weaver allegedly did, and it goes count by count. There are 8 counts total, and count 1 alleges that in Weaver's classroom, so we're on school property here, it says that she did commit an immoral and indecent act to and with the victim who is under the age of 16 with the intent to arouse and satisfy the sexual desires of both said accused and said child by kissing and fondling him, and it continues on. Now, count 2 alleges similar activity, but this time it happened quote, in the school store. Both of these alleged incidents happened sometime between January 20th and January 23rd. So those are two alleged sex acts that took place on school property. Then you have count 3 that alleges that Weaver sexually abused the same student on January 24th in the parking lot of a Sonic fast food restaurant. Then January 26th, Weaver allegedly sexually abused that student in her car in the parking lot of their school. Now, that is the 4th count of child molestation that Weaver is now facing. And then there's 4 other counts, and those all are for the charge of sexual contact by employee or agent in the first degree. And those charges do match up with the dates and locations of the alleged sexual abuses that happened in the previous 4 counts.
The document alleges 4 distinct acts of child molestation, supplemented by 4 additional charges of sexual contact by an employee or agent in the first degree. That's an important legal distinction. It means the state isn't just alleging a lapse in judgment. The state is alleging a systematic abuse of institutional authority. The irony sits here. In one TikTok, Weaver looks directly into the camera and asks, "Why do men have to be so creepy sometimes?"
I just need to know something for a minute. Why do men have to be so creepy sometimes? I am leaving Burlington. All I have to do is go in there and return something, minding my own business, okay? And then I'm walking to my car, minding my own business. And this man that was walking in just started talking to me like he knew me and asked me, "What kind of vape you got?" I didn't have nothing in my hands. All I had was my purse strapped around me. I said, "What?" He said, "What kind of vape?"
That video remains online. Yet the indictment alleges that between January 20th and January 26th, she engaged in physical sexual acts with a student under the age of 16. The first 2 counts place the alleged conduct inside the school itself. Once in her classroom, once in the school store. These are locations where a child should be protected by the sheer physical presence of a safety infrastructure. The 3rd count moves the alleged crime off campus to the parking lot of a Sonic fast food restaurant. The 4th count drags it back to the school parking lot inside her car. The shift in geography's behavior wasn't a singular panic behind a locked door. It was mobile. It was adapto-confident. The safety and well-being of students remained the highest priority. That's once. Now, look at the date ranges in the indictment. The classroom and school store incidents are bundled between January 20th and the floating windows. Then the Sonic parking lot allegation lands on a specific date, January 24th. The school parking lot allegation hits on January 26th. This sharpening of specificity is a forensic signal. When an indictment's from a range to a precise 24-hour date, it almost always indicates anchoring evidence, a receipt, a license plate reader hit, a cell tower ping, or a surveillance camera timestamp. The student may not remember what Tuesday camera does not forget a car pulling into a fast food lot. The timeline is no longer just an accusation. It is a digital scaffolding. This brings us to the ticking clock. Law enforcement was first contacted on February 3rd. The GBI walked in on February 4th. Most commercial surveillance systems overwrite their footage every 30 days. If the first alleged incident occurred on January 20th, that 30-day clock was set to expire on February 19th. Investigators had a window of roughly 2 weeks to pull video evidence before it vanished into the magnetic ether of a hard drive recycle bin. So here is the thriller question embedded in this procedural timeline: did the silence of a student outlast the memory of a machine? That question will likely define the forensic strength of this case.
We don't know how law enforcement got involved in this case. According to the indictment, the sexual incidents allegedly took place late January, and then you have local police called in on the 3rd, GBI's called in on the 4th, then she's arrested on the 17th of February. As far as how these cases come to be, and I look at the first 2 counts and I notice that it happened sometime between the 20th and 23rd, and then the count where it's at a Sonic, allegedly a Sonic parking lot, a fast food restaurant, that's more specific, saying it happened on the 24th. What does that tell you potentially about how these allegations came forward?
It's really hard to tell. I've prosecuted and investigated many situations like this, and usually when it involves an underage person and a teacher or someone else in authority at a school, it's reported by somebody else, maybe another person at the school or a parent or guardian of the alleged victim who reports it. I don't see that many where the underage person themselves is the first person to report directly to law enforcement. Often they will tell someone else who then reports to law enforcement, but we certainly don't know in this case. And then when there's an ongoing series of sexual interactions, as is alleged here, it's very common that people don't always remember the exact dates that they occurred if they were over a certain period of months. So it's common in cases like this to say, oh, this incident I know happened on this date because, this specific location is memorable. Other interactions, especially if they happened in school and you're in school all the time, you may not remember specifically what day.
We need to place this individual within the system. Danielle Weaver taught at the 9th grade campus of Lee County High School, Georgia, a small town, a tight community, roughly word 400 students.
So this is one of several videos that we found from Danielle Weaver on TikTok. She appears to have been very active on social media. She was a 9th grade teacher at Lee County High School in Leesburg, Georgia. This is a small town. It's outside of Albany, Georgia. If you know the state, about 2.5 hours from Atlanta. Now, Weaver's school, and it's her former school now, had roughly 1,400 students. And Weaver, on a personal life standpoint, appears to have been married at the time of her arrest. So she was a wife. And I'll get into why was is a key part of that here in just a moment. But very sadly, she's also a mom. And this is someone who had a child of her own and is now accused of sexually abusing a child. On social media, Danielle had pictures with who appears to be her husband, and he is taking action against her in the wake of her.
In the hierarchy of a high school, a 9th grade teacher occupies a specific transitional role. These are students shedding the skin of middle school, craving adult validation. The indictment doesn't use the word grooming, but the pattern of mobility fits the clinical architecture of it. These are not allegations of a single impulsive crash. This is an alleged architecture of movement. Taking a student from a classroom, to a school store, to a car, to an off-site restaurant. Each step is a progression away from structured oversight. The official school statement is that upon discovering the allegations, leadership acted immediately to ensure the safety and well-being of students. There it is, safety and well-being. That's twice, but look at the divorce filing. Court records from Lee County show that Weaver's husband filed for divorce on February 19th, one day after her arrest. The filing is a dry legal document, but the date stated for separation is February 5th, the day after the GBI took over the investigation. The filing claims the marriage is irretrievably broken. It makes no mention of the criminal charges. It doesn't need to. The timeline speaks for itself. A household implodes not on the day of the arrest but on the day the state police walk in. This siddle fix an unintentional exhibit in the criminal file. It reinforces the severity of the investigative pivot. It also reveals the concentric circles of damage. The indictment details acts against one child, but the divorce filing's lateral destruction of a second child, Weaver's own child, now caught in a custody battle triggered by a sexual abuse investigation.
Danielle Weaver is a mom, and that's a child who, if all of this is true, will be impacted in some way, I am sure, by all the attention surrounding their mom. But also, Danielle Weaver was married at the time of her arrest. And it appears, according to court records out of Georgia, that her husband filed for divorce in the wake of her arrest. The filing was put in on February 19th, so that's a day after Weaver turned herself into authorities on the charges, including child molestation. That was back in February. Now, the document alleges that Weaver's husband left her on February 5th, which is the day after GBI was called in. And the filing also says the marriage is irretrievably broken. Weaver's husband filed for custody.
Back to the charges. The indictment splits into two legal categories. Counts 1 through 4 are child molestation, which Ordinance 1664 involves any immoral or indecent encounter with a child under 16 with intent to arouse or satisfy sexual desires. The overt acts listed include kissing, fondling, and digital penetration. Counts 5 through 8 are sexual contact by an employee or agent in the first degree. This statute criminalizes the act engaging in sexual contact with a student enrolled at the same school. It eliminates the consent defense entirely. A 15-year-old cannot legally consent to a school employee. The state does not need to prove force or coercion for the counts. It only needs to prove the contact occurred and the authority relationship existed. That is a prosecutorial sledgehammer.
What do you make, like, now that we're seeing what a grand jury has indicted Danielle Weaver of, and of course these are all allegations and she's innocent until she's proven guilty. What do you make of what's been laid out from a timeline standpoint involving this teacher?
Well, according to the allegations and the indictment, this is not a one-time incident, that there are allegedly multiple instances, possibly 4, where the defendant had a student in her school engage in sexual interactions with her in different places, in a parking lot and other locations. It's according to the indictment, she had him touch her vagina with his fingers, and that is obviously concerning for a lot of reasons. One, that she's an authority figure at the school over him. Second of all, he's underage. The indictment says he's under 16 years old. So this is certainly very serious allegations. As you said, she's innocent until proven guilty, but certainly this is a serious indictment.
The defense will likely attack the ambiguity of the date ranges and the reliability of the victim's recall. but the dual-layer charging structure boxes them in. If you beat a molestation count by arguing reasonable doubt about intent, you still have to beat the employee's sexual contact count, which ignores intent entirely.
I also look at just, so it's 8 counts she's now facing. That's significantly more than when we first talked about this case. And what we knew back then was, GBI had gotten involved. There was an arrest warrant for Danielle Weaver, and that she was going to face a charge. And I think at that point it was a child under 18. And then now specifically it's an under 16 charge that she's facing. But you have 4 counts of child molestation. And it seems like those are the specific incidents that allegedly took place. And then on top of that, there are 4 additional charges. And these are sexual abuse by an educator or an agent. So this is someone who holds a position of authority, a state position. How do those charges, and we're talking about Georgia here, but I know a lot of different states have laws like that. How do those impact a case, knowing that you can put those on top of the specific molestation charges that she's facing?
So for each actual alleged incident, there might be multiple charges because it falls under different categories in the criminal law. And usually if someone is convicted, they'll receive a sentence that goes along with the highest range of sentencing for that particular range of charges for that incident. So you're not going to get consecutive time for that incident if there's multiple charges. Usually and by consecutive time, I mean when you serve a certain sentence and you start serving another sentence. However, each individual incident, you could potentially get consecutive time. In other words, you will serve one sentence, then another and another. So if there's 4 different incidents, that is much more significant in terms of conviction and sentencing than how many charges there are for each individual action, because usually those run together concurrently.
We also need to address the social media layer, which has become a hallmark of modern educator crime scenes. Weaver was active on top. She posted about her pregnancy cravings, her shopping, her irritation with men. She posted with students. She cultivated an image of transparency, but the indictment paints a picture of a person using that very accessibility. This is the darkened version of the cool teacher archetype. The public sees a teacher eating a fruit roll up and thinks, she gets it. An investigator sees a content creator operating in a high school and asks, where is the boundary between engagement and misconduct? When the fun teacher sits in a car with a student in a Sonic parking lot, does that look like mentorship or a date? The digital persona is now an exhibit for the prosecution because it establishes a pattern of informal familiarity that dissolves the professional barrier.
Well, first of all, in many cases that I've investigated and prosecuted, it is the teacher or authority figure who does seem very friendly, who does seem very approachable, who is most likely to be found having done something inappropriate. That doesn't mean that every friendly teacher is sexually abusing people, because that's obviously not true. But sexual abuse by authority figures, by teachers, almost always does not happen instantly. There's not just someone who starts engaging just in sexual contact. Usually there's a period of ingratiating themselves to the student, and then this boundary probing where they are getting more personal in terms of what they're talking about. And then maybe there's some touching that's not sexualized touching specifically, but might be touching on the shoulder or other ways. So there's a grooming period that often leads to the sex abuse. And who's in a best position to groom someone like that? Someone who is friendly, is approachable. The person who is coming off mean and unapproachable is probably not going to be able to groom someone. So unfortunately, because I don't want people to be overly paranoid about friendly teachers, because there's a lot of friendly teachers who are amazing, but certainly those are the people who are in the position to be trusted. And I've talked about this on your program before, how often in cases of child sex abuse, it is the person who is trusted the most, who is the person who is...
We are left with a school system that issued a statement prioritizing safety and well-being. That's 3 times. Yet the alleged incidents happened in a classroom, a school store, and a school parking lot. 3 distinct nodes on a single campus. How does a single teacher allegedly move a student through 3 separate physical spaces over 6 days without a single internal red flag tripping, unless the safety culture is reliant solely on self-reporting? The school's liability exposure will be determined by what they knew before February 3rd and what their policies actually enforce versus what they merely print in a staff handbook.
That's been brought against the school district, or whether that's a lawsuit that would have any merit. But we do know 3 out of the 4 alleged incidents were on school property, once in the classroom, once in the school store, and then once in a car in a school parking lot. How does that impact? Because you still have a student, every single one of these incidents, who's the alleged victim, and whether it's on, a Sonic, parking lot, or it's at a school. I mean, how much does the location of the incidents matter when it comes to any sort of litigation a school district could face?
Well, the fact that it happened on school property certainly might affect the exposure of the school to litigation. And some of the big factors that would be considered are, what did the school know? What should they have known? What were their policies and procedures like? Did they have a culture at the school where people who might have seen suspicious activity would report that? It's really hard for a school to just be liable just because a teacher did something if there's no way they could have known that the teacher was doing it. But many schools that I've conducted investigations for, we found that there was suspicious activity reported and the school either ignored it or didn't put it through the proper procedures. And that led to maybe the teacher feeling emboldened to continue to sexually abuse someone. And that's when there's severe liability. So certainly there needs to be an internal investigation done by the school, whether it's by an internal investigator or an external investigator, to find out who knew about the teacher's interactions with the student beforehand, what did they know, what was reported, and what was done by the school. And also looking forward, what can they do to make sure this doesn't happen again? What kind of warning signs can they encourage people to report? What kind of a culture?
If a surveillance camera captured a car in a school lot after hours, did anyone monitor it? Or is the footage just a passive recording waiting for a grand jury?
You may not remember specifically what date they occurred on. So that's very common in cases like this.
So I also wonder, just what went through my mind is those first two counts. One is allegedly took place in a classroom. The other is in the school store, so probably a place where students could go buy stuff. And then the third count, which was more specific on the 24th, is the Sonic restaurant, which would have, we know that probably has surveillance video of potentially a car that would go in there. I don't know if that exists, but then the school, I'm unsure whether they would have surveillance video. But let's just say it's allegations from a person or potentially the victim in this case. How strong of a case do you have if it is, those first two counts, it's just one individual saying that it took place?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. First, I would say that I deal a lot with security cameras in investigations I'm doing, and most security cameras delete their footage after about 30 days. So here are some of the allegations are in January of 2026, and hopefully, if there was security footage, they were preserved by law enforcement when they got involved within the next month or so. That's certainly the first step that an investigator or law enforcement does. Not every part of a building has coverage for law enforcement to get footage. So certainly that's something to look into. Now, if there's not security footage, what other evidence might there be? Well, certainly was the younger underage person, were they talking to other people in contemporaneous manner about what happened? So maybe they were telling friends, telling family, and maybe this text messages I've seen in cases I've had where they text a friend that something just happened with this teacher or authority figure at my school. And that provides some corroboration of what happened. And then also the law enforcement attempt to interview the defendant. And we don't know much about that, but usually they'll try to talk to them. Sometimes, we've had cases, Chris, we've talked about where someone confesses and admits to it, and sometimes they don't. So those are some of the things that people look to. And also other people in the school who might have noted interactions between them.
Now, Danielle wears out on a $50,000 bond.
So we know that police were first called to investigate on February 3rd. And then the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the statewide agency, they were called in to investigate the next day. But it wasn't until February 17th that GBI filed warrants for Weaver's arrest. Weaver then turned herself into the county jail on February 18th, and she was held on a $50,000 bond, and she was able to post that, and she's been released. Now, reportedly, according to WALB television, her bond conditions say that she can't have any direct contact or indirect contact with the alleged victim, be within a mile of that alleged victim. It also says she cannot return to any education facility for someone under the age of 18 in Lee County unless she has a member of law enforcement with her, and she is only allowed to go there and collect personal belongings. Now, in a statement to
Her
parents,
conditions of release prohibit her from being within a mile of the alleged victim, from having any contact with him, and from returning to any education facility for minors in Lee County unless accompanied by law enforcement to retrieve personal belongings. She is a mother who cannot enter a school. She is a wife who is being divorced. She is a social media personality who is
when
silent.
it comes to just, because it's not only just the victim, and the victim's the most important person in all these cases, and the victim's family and the impact on them and the trauma that all of this can have. But I think of just the massive amount of people who get impacted by cases of this when you have a teacher that does something like what this teacher's accused of.
Absolutely. There are many, many lives that are ravaged here, both besides the victim and this defendant. Also, as you said, the defendant's family, the victim's family, other people at the school, all the people who feel now they can't trust other teaching personnel at that school and other schools. And it has devastating effects. And especially for someone who's a victim of child sex abuse, it has long-lasting traumatic effects that can last a lifetime, whether someone is male or female as the victim, and whether the defendant is male or female. And we've talked about that, previously on your program. So I think that when people just see it as an isolated situation between two people, that's really wrong, and that there's so
Go to the Lee County Superior Court records online, pull the indictment document. It is public, it is unsealed, and it is damning in its bureaucratic recitation of facts. Count the dates, look at the progression of locations, read the specific language of the sexual contact by an employee statute. My question to you in the comments is this: based on the timeline and the locations, what piece of physical evidence do you think ultimately triggered the arrest warrant on February 17th? Was it a Rick's message? Or a surveillance frame showing two people in a car that had no reason to be there? If you want more forensic breakdowns like this one, hit like, share, and make sure you're subscribed to EvidenceAxis turned on. The evidence doesn't protect reputations. The evidence doesn't craft crisis statements. The evidence just sits there in the court file, waiting for someone to read it.